So my project is on heat mitigation and specifically on the planning side. How do we plan for mitigating heat? And my title is Heat Mitigation Beyond Handing Out Water in Maricopa County, because that is right now what we do to mitigate the impact of heat on residents and particularly homeless people. So the problem that we're having in Maricopa County is that when you look at any type of natural hazard, floods, wildfires, hail, thunderstorms, whatever you can think of, lightning, heat kills more people than any other hazard in Maricopa County. The problem is, and this is a screenshot. Oh, I see, I didn't do my animation right. So the problem is that natural hazard mitigation, the planning piece of this, is done in the context of emergency managers. So emergency managers largely write these plans on how you mitigate certain hazards. So there's a plan that you can pull up for Maricopa County that you can actually pull up for every county in the US. You can pull up for every state. And these plans lay out, okay, these are the past impacts we had from a certain hazard. And when I say impacts, it can be fatalities, injuries, damage to property, etc. And then this plan makes suggestions of how we could address these impacts. So there's a long list, it's like a Christmas list of things we could do to mitigate the impact of floods and thunderstorms. So let's say, a community might propose that they need to restore a creek and give the water just more space, or they need to elevate their homes, or that they need to do an educational outreach campaign. When it comes to heat, we think of heat and we sort of assess the risk for heat, but somehow our imagination of what we can do about heat goes entirely out the window. And when you thumb through these plans, nothing is in there about, or very little is in there about how to specifically address heat. And not only in terms of the actions that you can take, but also just, Christina gave us a nice example of how important it is to have data to really think about interventions. And very similar to this, we also have it's not similar in the sense, we're not talking about children specifically, but here with heat, the problem is we don't have data on the impacts of heat. So the screenshots you see here, the tables, I hope you can see this. You see extreme heat, cold, so it's also lumped together. So big disasters, and when I say disasters, I put this in quotation marks because the Federal Emergency Management Agency has a specific definition of what these major disasters are. And look, all these hundreds of people that we have die from heat every year in Maricopa County do not count as a big disaster. And then in the table next to it, we have very little data. So in this column and this cell here, you see 35 fatalities. In the chart earlier, you saw that, we have hundreds of people die from heat in Maricopa County alone every year. So in the plan for Maricopa County, it says we have 632 confirmed deaths from heat alone from 2006 through 2013. So right there, what I find I've written these plans and I know how FEMA sort of goes about approving these plans. What really matters to FEMA are these tables, where you can see, heat is less damaging than flood and less damaging than wildfire, da, da, da. And in this table, the 632 people don't show up. So there's a tendency in the Maricopa County plan that we talk about heat and we talk about its impacts, but the context that it's put in comparison to wildfires and floods, heat does not really show up, as if it doesn't matter. So when I say, in the context, it's really important that in the context of all the other states in the US, we rank, so not just Maricopa County, but Arizona as a state, we rank #1 in terms of heat fatalities. Now, the shocking part when I dived into some of the data that FEMA provides on the hazards that they spend money on, so the projects they are willing to fund to mitigate floods, wildfires, heat, there's not a single project, a standalone project for heat. There's never been a declared disaster, these big major disasters for heat, even though we had big heat waves in Chicago in the 90s that killed more than 700 people. So somehow heat does not register on our radar of hazards to mitigate. What did I do with my animations? So the research questions I'm going to address in this project is which cities in Maricopa County, so we have 28 jurisdictions in the county, which is very challenging to manage. So which cities in Maricopa County are interested and willing to revise, propose, and adopt standalone heat mitigation actions in the 2019 plan update of the Maricopa County All Hazards Mitigation Plan. So the county right now is in an update of the mitigation plans. So right now, this is a great opportunity to sort of see who wants to play and what kind of information people want to update. So the question is not just who wants to play, but also what do they want to do? So the second question is what dedicated standalone heat mitigation actions are appealing to those involved in the Maricopa County Plan update? And as these actions go into the plan, so they are non-binding, but when these mitigation actions go in the plan, the Federal Emergency Management Agency wants to see some sort of assessment on, what are the pros and cons of implementing these actions? What are the challenges? Are there any social challenges, technical hurdles, administrative challenges, etc.? So these don't have to be like extensive studies. It can be just the working group sort of assessing, ballparking what they think, what those hurdles may be. And I moved my so what up a little bit, and I see I'm not the best organized person today. I've already mentioned my so what. The so what is that the Federal Emergency Management Agency has never funded heat mitigation actions at all, ever. And you will see FEMA always say, oh, we are all hazards, agency, we treat every hazard the same. But when you actually dig in, it's not the case. And I think if Arizona, with our heat mortality, if we are not one, to push that issue, then I wonder, which state or county would do that. And the importance of having these mitigation actions in the plan is because they are the absolute prerequisite if FEMA is ever in a position to fund these actions. The absolute prerequisite is that the proposed action has to be in the plan. So you could have the most perfect idea of what we could do about mitigating heat, and then you turn towards the federal government and say, hey, could you please fund this project with a 75% share? Then they will turn around and be like, okay, is it in your plan? If it's not in your plan, it will never see the light of day. So it's the really first basic step that we need to do is become more creative and put these actions in the mitigation plans. Let me move my Zoom a little. So the purpose of the study is to get these mitigation actions into the plan as this plan now gets revised this year. And the hypotheses I want to test is, are there more structural versus non-structural mitigation actions that are appealing to our various jurisdictions? So structural, non-structural means non-structural would be education. Structural mitigation action, for instance, would be building a cooling center. And then we already know that the cities of Tempe and Phoenix are willing to participate in this, but are they, the question, I want to see if there's more than just them and what they're willing to implement. And is the implementation of structural heat mitigation options less challenging or more challenging with regard to social, administrative, political, and or legal obstacles? So this assessment of how likely it is to implement some of these actions. So why is my slide not moving here? How am I going to go about this? So as I mentioned, we are right now, and it is a good timing because we are in the phase of updating the plan. It hasn't really started yet. The county hasn't gotten funding yet to start this process. And then with COVID-19, it got pushed back. But this plan update is largely run by an engineering firm that gets hired as a consultant. And so my duty now is to kind of collaborate largely with the city of Tempe and this consultant to organize workshops and focus groups to really put this on the table and discuss this. So the county is very supportive of this, but they don't see this as part of their task. You know, they are just interested in updating the plan, and whatever this project can assist and contribute, they're willing to take on. Then the other opportunity is that the city of Tempe and Phoenix have expressed interest and taken leadership, and they just formed a they formed a coordination group that has now weekly calls on heat mitigation, but it's more, I shouldn't say heat mitigation, it's more heat response. So they check in every week and say, hey, have you set up your hydration stations? Do you have a place, you know, for homeless people? What's up with your cooling centers? So really just check-in calls, but I think it's a great opportunity for people to get to know each other, and then for me to pull on this group or draw on this group and pull them into this project. Then also ASU has done a ton of work already on heat. So there's existing networks and partnerships. I'm also going to pull on these mitigation plans that exist. So we've already reviewed a multitude of state and local hazard mitigation plans, what they propose. The bottom line is there's not a lot of creativity, and there's not a lot of ideas that are actually in those plans. And that applies for the US, not just for Arizona. So we've done already a review of many of these plans. So we've reviewed 15 out of 60 state plans. There's a sort of reasoning why we chose some over others. We've pulled right now about 80 heat mitigation actions. There needs to be some consolidation. I need to go through the IRB process because I want to do focus groups and workshops, because we really need to do, or I need to do serious workshop facilitation, because we need to work through this list of actions and then figure out, you know, which actions rise to the top for what reasons, and then how do these actions get assessed in terms of their feasibility for implementation. So I'll do a lot of observations, note taking. I'll have students with me, and then we'll do a lot of coding of these observations. And I'm not sure if I'm going to interviews. I don't think so. I think I'd rather leave this sort of on a group level. And then the deliverables for the projects are going to be really getting these actions into the plan. I know that's a little tricky to put that on there because, you know, there could be various reasons why these actions might not get included, but I just put this on my list. I really want to get to these actions being in the plan. And then a journal manuscript up. And in terms of acknowledgements, obviously, Kerr, without Kerr, this wouldn't happen. And then, as I mentioned before, there's been a lot of work already done at ASU, specifically by David Hondula and Liza Kurtz. They're in the geography department. Then my student who's working with me, oh my God, I have all these typos on here. I just can't believe it. Claire Winter. And then obviously I need to thank Maricopa County Emergency Management, because they're willing to partner on this, and Braden Kay from the city of Tempe for really taking the reins of this topic and running with it. Thank you. Oh, why can I not hear you? Are you on mute? Okay, I saw it.
You know.
You just had my heart drop. I'm like, okay, was I just talking without anybody being able to hear me?
Darn, I should have just kept going. I'm just teasing, Melanie. That was a great talk. There's one question on the chat from, looks like both Julia and Janice have the same question. They're wondering what percentage of Arizona fatalities were homeless, and if that plays into the perception that it isn't big enough of a problem.
So I don't have exact numbers on that, because getting data on, so when you look at, for instance, just from a technical point of view, when you look at a death certificate where it says, you know, this person died from XYZ, very often the coroner who fills out that information does not necessarily put on there that is heat related. And if there is not a classification that this is heat related, then it just doesn't show up in the data set. But I can tell you from a lot of research that's been done that a lot of the heat related fatalities are people actually dying in their homes. So we often think it's probably the homeless people because they're exposed, but a lot of it has to do with people being indoors, a lot of elderly people. So we have a lot of research that tells us some of those driving forces, what's behind sort of vulnerability to heat. So elderly people being, you know, on fixed income, broken air conditioning, not wanting to turn on air conditioning, and also people working outside, you know, farm workers, people working in construction. So there's a lot more injuries on people who work outdoors, but fatalities of most of the time actually indoors.
I know we did some research last summer with mobile homes, and that was a recurring theme because of, you know, lack of insulation, lack of income. There was just so many things. It's very sad to think that somebody passes away, and sometimes it takes weeks for a well check.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of sort of public health aspects to this. There's a lot of the people who pass away from heat might be elderly. You know, elderly, just like kids, have a hard time sort of regulating their own temperature, realizing, you know, that they're not hydrated enough, realizing that they're too hot. You tell your grandma or your grandpa to do X, Y, Z, and they're like, oh, I know better. And they, you know, just don't turn it on or can't turn it on.
I think also the perception is I'm safe, I'm indoors, you know, but really you're sitting in a tin can if you're in a mobile home. Yeah, there's, you know, it's really sad.
And so if you think about that, and so if you think about that, that most of the time people actually die indoors, but the actions that we're proposing or we're going to do is handing out water. So there's this massive disconnect. So we, right then and there, you see that where people die and why people die is disconnected what we do about it.
Yeah. Agreed. Any other questions before we move on to Martha?
Yeah, I have a question. Is there, Melanie, this is really fascinating. Is there any data on the kinds of structures where these kinds of fatalities at home tend to happen in? Like you mentioned, or mobile homes came up. Are modular homes typically considered or typically associated with this kind of thing?
Yes, very much so. I mean, when you look at any kind of hazard, they never show up, you know, they don't rate well for any hazard, being flooding, being tornado, being heat.
Sure, yeah.
So when you look at other countries, so, you know, mobile homes is a very US specific type of residence. But for instance, when you look at Europe, when they had, in the early 2000s, when they had this massive heat wave, for instance, in Paris, a lot of elderly women died because they lived way on top, you know, in that apartment right under the roof, and there's a lot of metal roofs in Paris. So it depends very much on context.
All right, got it. Yeah, thank you.